Thank you. Welcome everybody as we start this webinar. Just waiting for people to join. I can see the number creeping up. Good to see so many of you here on a Monday morning in the UK. Welcome everybody, wherever you're based. I think we can probably start now. So, hello everybody. I'm Louise Pryor and I'm the President of the Institution Faculty of Actuaries, and it's absolutely my pleasure to welcome you here to the first event in our Thought Leadership webinar series focusing on sustainability issues, the Road to Glasgow. We're going to be having events throughout the autumn. The series forms part of the IFoA's 2021 Thought Leadership Programme, and we're going to be convening leading experts, thinkers and decision makers together with members, our own members, so that we can debate the key sustainability issues of our time that intersect both actuarial science and the interests of wider society. We're hosting this webinar series throughout the autumn ahead of COP26 in Glasgow, and I'm really pleased to be able to chair this series during my presidential year at what is a critical moment for climate action. Through the series, we're going to be providing a platform for prominent contributors so that you, our members, and others, of course, can understand the perspectives of a wide range of parties interested in the climate debate. We'll also be promoting the actuarial contribution to addressing climate change and positioning the IFoA at the heart of key debates occurring against the backdrop of COP26. From the implications of the climate crisis for insurance and investment to the global role of actuaries, the path to net zero, and the importance of biodiversity, the series will feature discussions across a range of topics relevant to the work of actuaries. We'll be drawing on the expertise of our diverse range of experts from within academia, the financial sector, and the profession's own thought leadership community around the world. So this series is not to be missed, and I'm pleased that so many of you have joined us for our opening event. Events in this series are free to attend, and you can register online via the IFoA events page. I hope to see many of you at these events throughout the autumn. So we're here because the UK will be hosting the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, hence COP26, in Glasgow between the 31st of October and the 12th of November. The summit will bring parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. As we build up to this event, around the world, storms, floods, and wildfires are intensifying. Air pollution affects the health of tens of millions of people, and unpredictable weather causes untold damage to homes and livelihoods, as well as, of course, damage to people. The loss of biodiversity and healthy ecosystems is contributing to the acceleration of climate change, which in turn contributes to the loss of the biodiversity and healthy ecosystem. It's a complex problem. It's a systems problem. COP26 is a pivotal moment for decisive collective action on climate. It represents the first chance since the Paris Agreement in 2015 for nations to review their commitments and to further strengthen their ambitions during a period where there's been greater clarity around the science behind the dangers of exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. The recent report by the IPCC only served to confirm these dangers and emphasized why COP26 must deliver tangible progress. Our governments are not solely responsible for action on climate. As members of a global profession with the public interest remit at its core, it's incumbent on we actuaries to take our own action and to lead the way within the financial sector. I've been heavily involved in sustainability for a number of years now, and I'm pleased to see the climate debate rise up the profession's agenda. We're already seeing climate risk affect the work of actuaries, and it's widely accepted that this will increase into the future with an increasingly heightened regulatory focus to match. The actuarial profession is more active than ever in discussions on climate, and our unique skill set is frequently called on to better understand these risks, as we hope to demonstrate through this series. Today's event, the first in our series, focuses on the needs of developing countries as we approach COP26. Developing countries are likely to be the most impacted by climate change, yet the least able to afford its consequences. COP26 President Alok Sharma has said that richer nations must deliver now on long-promised funding to help poorer countries adapt to and mitigate against climate change. However, the pledge of £100 billion a year by 2020, the pledge that was made in 2009, has not been met yet. Here we are in 2021, and the associated commitments no longer look realistic. For a global profession which represents members in both developed and developing nations, it's important that we understand the perspectives, opportunities, and challenges of our peers in different parts of the world. Over the course of the next hour, our panel will share their insights and expertise in this space. And what a panel it is. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Firstly, Professor Saleem Hook. Saleem is Director of the International Centre for Climate Change and Development. He's a professor at the Independent University of Bangladesh and Associate of the International Institute on Environment and Development. He's an expert in adaptation to climate change in the most vulnerable developing countries and has been a lead author of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th assessment reports of the IPCC. He also advises the Least Developed Countries Group in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He also has a great Twitter feed. Do please follow him on Twitter. Secondly, Dr Dabo Guan, Professor in Climate Change Economics and the Low Carbon Transition at the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction, University College London. Dabo's also Distinguished Professor at Tsinghua University in China and a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. He specializes in environmental economics for international climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, scenario analysis on environmental impacts, water resources accounting and management, input-output modeling, and their applications in both developed and developing countries. He's very busy and very good, knows a lot. Finally, Prosper Matiashe. Prosper is a council member of the IFoA, as well as being a fellow of the IFoA, and specializes in life insurance and healthcare. He's the Analytics and Actuarial Services Manager at FBC Holdings Limited, one of the largest banking groups in Zimbabwe. Previously, he was the Business Development Actuary for FBC Holdings, where he led product development, pricing, and strategy. He's an active volunteer within the actuarial profession with involvement in the Actuarial Society of Zimbabwe, the International Actuarial Association's Banking Working Group, and as a career ambassador for the IFoA. And as I said, he's also one of our council members. So we're very lucky to have these 3 great panelists here today. And I'm going to ask each of them to make some short opening remarks before we open up to a panel discussion and then questions from the floor. Please submit questions at any time in the Q&A box in Zoom. And you can submit them at any time and we'll pick them up a bit later. So Saleem, if you'd like to go first, followed by Dabo and then Prosper. Over to you, Saleem.
Great, thank you very much, Louise, and thank you for inviting me to this really exciting event. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. So what I'm going to do is to share some thoughts from the perspective of the most vulnerable developing countries, not all developing countries, but the most vulnerable. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I advise the group of least developed countries, which is one of the particularly vulnerable group of countries, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Asia, including my country, Bangladesh, where I am based. So the biggest issue for the vulnerable developing countries has been for a long time and will be again in COP26, the fact that climate change impacts are already happening and we are already dealing with them for quite some time. The developed world is just beginning to see those impacts, and we just saw the effects of Hurricane Ida hitting the United States of America, cutting a swath all the way from Louisiana to floods in New York and New Jersey. And I believe the current estimate of human lives lost in the United States is already past 50 people lost their lives in the richest, most technologically advanced country who saw the cyclone or the hurricane coming and were not able to deal with it. And that is what we are talking about now. We have entered into what I call the era of loss and damage from human-induced climate change, absolutely scientifically attributable to the fact that global temperature, mean temperature has gone up well above 1 degree centigrade compared to the pre-industrial era because of the emissions of greenhouse gases over the last century and a half. And we are headed to 3, possibly even 4 degrees, unless we take drastic action to keep it below 2 degrees and if possible 1.5 degrees. We haven't lost the battle for 1.5, but time is running very, very short. And as the last IPCC report, the 6th assessment report, Working Group 1 has reported within the last couple of weeks, we are now entered into the era of visible, credible, scientifically attributable impacts of climate change. And now in that context, this issue of loss and damage and how to deal with it, which is a highly politically sensitive issue because the developed countries do not like talking about it because they feel it will open up opportunities for liability and compensation, which are taboo words for them. We're not allowed to use those words in the discussions. However, we don't need to use those words. We just need to use the words that climate change is real, it's happening, and we're going to have to deal with it, whether we like it or not. And we cannot put our heads in the sand and say we're not going to talk about it. We're going to ignore it because it is already knocking on our door. And in fact, we can see it through our windows. We don't need an IPCC report anymore. And so the issue for us, and I would suggest also for the actuarial community writ large, is how can you bring your skills in the insurance world, in the risk management world, to help the rest of the world deal with these impacts of climate change. And there have already been some very good examples of this. There's a whole area of index-based insurance that is emerging for droughts in Africa, for hurricanes in the Caribbean, for flooding in Bangladesh and other countries. These have the pilot projects that are ongoing with some success and also some lack of success, I would say. And these are good lessons for us to all learn from. And the insurance industry is certainly taking note, the reinsurance industry in particular taking note of this. However, I would argue also that, as Louise mentioned in the beginning, for the vast majority of the poor people on the planet living in the poorest countries, they simply don't have access to insurance, to the private insurance market. And so if the insurance world, actuaries and companies, simply wait for business opportunities to arise, then the poor people on the planet are going to be ignored. So they need to step up. They need to step up in a spirit of public-private partnership, bring their skills and knowledge to bear, and support governments and local authorities and even local communities to come up with ways in which the skills and knowledge of the actuarial world can be brought to bear to help the reality on the ground, particularly focusing on the most vulnerable communities and people in the most vulnerable countries, which is my area of work, expertise, and research. And on my own behalf, I would like to offer my support in helping those of you who might be interested in exploring how your skill sets and your knowledge can play a role beyond simply doing business for insurance. Thank you. I'll stop there and happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Saleem. That was great. Over to you, Dabo.
Okay, Luis, I'm gonna show a few slides here,
Yeah.
and then with some numbers, and then the people may have a bit understanding about the climate change mitigations and the quantitative evidence. Oops. Okay, I try to keep brief. So as Saleem was saying that the global mean temperatures keep rising, this is the scientific kind of a graph in the IPCC report, so in the public kind of academic journals. So we have been going really fast over the past 100 years, but especially in the last 20, 30 years. And if we keep as what we have done, then we will reach the high climate risk, which is the temperature will rise about 5 to 7 degrees Celsius. And our goal is below 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5 degrees Celsius. But current trend doesn't really deliver that. We need lots of effort to do that. And really, I'm doing a lot of the carbon accounting and really trying to talk about what does that mean for 2 degrees Celsius, how much emissions you actually can be emit there. So this is a graph shows you in the 2 degrees C target in the how much can be accommodated in the atmosphere. So the black bars here, it looks like quite a lot, but actually this is the damage already made. And how much is left is pretty much this. So we have roughly about 800 gigatons of emissions globally remained from right now until the end of the century to have this 2 degrees C target, to keep the 2 degrees C target. It's really much left. And even when we look at this, that question is how do we who gets what basically? And I put the 4 major economy in the world here. Just in the past, their trends. So US, EU, China, India, EU plus UK, basically. So this is what they have done over the past 10 years. This they committed to do by the end of the century. So the 3 major countries has already committed the carbon neutralities. So this is so much. And the key question now, just assuming that all the 3 countries are able to deliver what they promised by the end of the year, by the end of the 2060, for India and other developing countries to grow, further growth in the next, let's say, 40 years. In terms of the current trends, no, certainly you can see if it's a BAU trend, there won't be enough. But what will be the next to do? Whose responsibility to do what? Very quickly about the emission accounts. There's so many different ways to account emissions. There's lots of literatures, bounce and back and forth, so many things. I just want to make it very clear. There's 2 major accounting framework here. The IPCC or the global negotiation using this one is called the territory emission account. It tells you whose emission within the boundaries of their territories is this country's emissions. And then there's some misallocation, like a not allocated emission here, which is international logistics and, for example, airplanes and shipping. And then they actually trying to allocate that into by some method. I'm not going to go to the details, but still within the production-based emission account. One other major thing is called consumption-based emission account. This tells you, for example, China, US is the yellow one. They not only produce themselves, they also import a lot from China as well. From consumption perspective, this is their production emission accounting minus their export plus their imports. So it's the same works for every other country. This is called the consumption-based emissions. So this is different to the mechanisms of count emissions. They have the different responsibility coming up. This basically the map shows you from production side to consumption side how the emission actually flows. quite complicated, but the key part is the left-hand side, electricity sector is the most important sector from production side, but from the consumption side, it's become like construction sectors, like the building houses and the road and infrastructures, because mostly carbon intensive from consumption side. From countryside, you can look at that. If we say a consumer should take a little bit more responsibility, is that our consumption in the UK and the people in the US, they have much higher the carbon footprint than the average in India and Bangladesh and many other countries. And maybe some of the responsibility should be taken from consumption side. We also be able to, and a growing amount of literature looking at the multinational enterprises, how those big companies they can do, like Coca-Cola, BP, Volkswagen, how they can do. They are as a company, they are almost, their companies' whole carbon kind of the emissions even larger for the whole supply chain, even larger than many other countries in the sector levels. I'm showing here just for demonstration purposes, just showing how important those large companies, their magnitude, also their impact, their impact to drive the whole supply chains. Finally, a little bit on the investors. So those large companies are owned by a few investors. Seriously, a few investors in the world, and this is the top 4 investors in the world. Well, investing companies, of course. And if you account the Scope 3, which is the consumption base for the whole the invest supply chains, their emissions is really big. So this is just basically a several ways approach about who should take responsibilities, and from whether it's a country's level or whether it's a consumer level, large company and the investors level. So I think I stop here. Welcome for questions later on.
Thanks, Dabo. That gives us a great summary of these issues. And now, Prosper, if you'd like to talk a bit about your views.
Thank you very much. Good morning, team. When we are looking at, I will start with the how can financial service sector also assist in terms of developing countries. From where I stand at the moment, we actually need to provide a lot of training to developing countries and stakeholders involved in developing countries. I'll give an example of, if you look, for example, where in Zimbabwe, where I work, I did a scan of the banks or banking institutions that are in Zimbabwe. I think out of about 20, only 3 have a policy at board level or at shareholder level that talks to climate change or green finance, right? And when you then look and assess why we have that gap, for most of them, it's an issue of where do we start? We don't even know how we can start to say we are now funding green projects. If you want to fund the green projects, as a bank, you should be seen as a subject matter expert. You can't go and tell a farmer how to do green agriculture when yourself you don't even understand what involves. So where I'm looking at is, the first thing is, in the global financial service sector, if we can partner and then train institutions that are in developing countries to be better positioned to then cascade the same impact to industries in those countries, that will be helpful. For example, a bank in UK who are already well advanced in doing green finance or financing and providing insurance to green initiatives, they could then partner with an insurance company in Zimbabwe, South Africa, Bangladesh, and provide them with a lot of insights. How do you do the whole process? What training do you need? And some of the training can then also be done for free, because the moment we also talk of cost, some of our developing country shareholders, they start complaining to say we don't have the money to do that, or the management might not provide the necessary training. So I think that level of collaboration, where a bigger institution If we are talking of maybe JP Morgan, right? They have very good global view of what's happening. Maybe they could partner with a few banks, a few insurers, so to speak. There are big asset managers like BlackRock, you talk of Vanguard and so on, who I actually know now and then they actually have exposure to certain listed companies in developing countries, right? They provide key avenues and levers of providing that level of training. Then, of course, the time is now where as the financial service sector also need to then fund green initiatives. The view, which I see amongst a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of companies, is that really taking that green initiative or green route is expensive, right? And another one of our customers said to us, look, you want me to take the green route, yet you are charging me the same interest rate, whether I was going to pollute big time or I'm going to be green. It doesn't make sense for me. There's no incentive, right? So maybe those are some of the avenues where we should actually show that if you are taking the green route, there's no extra expense to do that, right? You actually get maybe better financing, better structuring of the financing, better insurance mechanisms, and so on. So as actuaries, we actually have to be at the forefront of designing that financing, right? The structuring of the loans, the structuring of the insurance, so to speak. Here in Zimbabwe, a few years ago, we tried rainfall index, and there were big claims, and in the end, also we had the cyclone died. So it was mayhem afterwards, claims after claims, and reinsurers pulled out of the whole thing. So we are back to square one, right? So it shows maybe a product that was supposed to address the problem, but didn't really address the problem. So that stakeholder collaboration is also important. Actually, are at the forefront of pricing risk, so to speak. But I guess we also need to get people who are more experienced, the engineers and other people involved there, so that we can actually have something that really works, and the capital to do that can be made available consistently with a win-win situation between the clients and whoever is funding those projects. I think that would be my initial submission, Louise.
Thanks, Prosper. Some really interesting comments there. It's always struck me that the financial services industry, there's sort of several things it can do. It can focus on divestment, which many of them are doing to a certain extent, but it can also focus on the products and services it offers. How can those products and services actually support and encourage adaptation and mitigation, but also how can they help people in this changing risk landscape? And that's something that I'd be quite interested in thinking a bit more about. So how can the financial services sector support developing nations? I think you talked about, Prosper, how we can help vulnerable countries understand and prepare for climate change. I suspect understanding isn't the big problem. I suspect it's preparation that's the big problem. Saleem, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. So I think, as I said earlier, in my view, we are just entering what I call the new era of loss and damage from climate change. Things are only going to get worse, and every year is going to be worse than the year before, at least for the foreseeable decade or even 2 decades if we don't get our act together. Even if we are able to shift the balance of ambition drastically as we need to do, as Dabo has shown, the impacts of that or the effects of that will only show up in the medium to long term. The near term, the next decade or even 2 decades is locked in. It's going to happen. Whether we like it or not, we're going to see more and more of these kinds of impacts everywhere. And in fact, my prediction is every single day, there is going to be a new weather extreme broken somewhere in the world every single day from now on. And I'm being borne out in that if you just look at the last few weeks of this year. From July 2021 onwards, that prediction, I think, is a very, very strong prediction. And we can now say that they are attributable, in fact, not the cause of them, but the intensity of these events, the record-breakingness of these events is now absolutely, credibly, scientifically attributable to the fact that we have interfered with the global temperature and we are now causing this. So the cause is not natural anymore. The cause is nature plus human beings, and the humans are responsible for the intensity and therefore the losses and damages associated with them. So in that sense, we need to start figuring out what to do. And that's really where I find the role of actuaries with your expertise and knowledge a very valuable resource that we need to be building on and bringing on board, and particularly for the less developed countries where this is not a well-developed science. I don't actually know any actuary in Bangladesh. I would be very surprised if there is one. And we would like to have that expertise developed, and we'd like to learn from other countries, including from Zimbabwe and the UK, on how do we build that skill set and that knowledge set to do these risk estimations at a very fine-grained national and even local level, which is going to be required going forward. So to me, the first task is just knowledge sharing and capacity building, and then working out what we need to do all at the same time. But for the poorest countries, it's about just building up our knowledge to deal with it. It's a new subject. We really do not have any expertise in it, and we need to build that expertise as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Dabo, do you want to come in on this?
I agree with Saleem and the Prosper's opinion on that. Just one other things, maybe two more points. Talking about firstly about the lock-in, like the usually called committed or the lock-in emissions. There's apart from the quite lots of the infrastructures in the developed countries like us, we are gonna keep emitting the lots of emissions in the near future, and at least in the next couple of decades. There's many new infrastructures and the conventional infrastructures being built, are being built or will be built in the next few years in developing countries. No, I'm not only talking about China. Lots of Indian, South Asia, even in Africa, Ethiopia, and then Uganda. This is also lots of infrastructures being built. So this is the key things. So they are building on the conventional infrastructure. They should be doing that. They should come with some capacity building for the human resources to have energy efficiency or energy conservation on the or a low carbon technology. When this the time for the spillovers from the developed countries to the developing countries, those because it's not only the piece of equipment or the infrastructure, it also come with capacity buildings and lots of the financial and technology aids on that. So this is my first point. Second, many like low-income countries in South Asia, small ones like Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, they are growing at a tremendous, extraordinary rate, over 10% per year of their emission. Each individual of them, it doesn't make significant as a global contribution to the global emission, but together, if we that together, we actually count about 60 of the small, medium size of the developing countries. They are together, they count for about 20% of the global emissions. So they are larger than actually the third emitter in the world, which is India, 60% more than Indians' emissions. So while in the COP or in Glasgow, we should not only pay attention to the major emitters, but also the future emitters. They have a right to develop, but how we could help them to slow down, decelerate, and then to have the curve more flattened rather than to have just shooting up the emission trends. So I think that's a couple of points I want to make.
Yeah, so that's mitigation is really important, obviously, but in many of these countries, adaptation is also really important. Exactly. Because it's happening now and it's happening badly. Prosper, I mean, one of the problems is that many of these countries don't actually have well-developed financial systems. So it's not clear to me how the financial sector can act for good in these countries, and especially obviously the role of actuaries we're particularly interested in. Do you have anything you can say about this?
Yeah, I think there are a number of ways, maybe at profession level, is actuaries, maybe if you talk of Africa, out of 54 countries, I would rather say maybe around 10 if actuaries, I think. But what I've picked is that in each and every country, there is someone who has a voice and who has influence. We got to pick that person and collaborate with them, right? I can tell you, in those small countries, there are banks. They have a CEO. That CEO talks to the Minister of Finance day in, day out. We can use that person to get to the government and get something to be done. Because in these countries, the government doesn't allow you to do something without them being involved, right? You look at universities. Right now, I lecture part-time for free at the University of Zambia, right? It's a way of influencing even the students that are still coming up and going into institutions to be aware of climate change, right? And providing the services for free so that there is development. You know, you'd also talk to some of the lecturers, their professors and so on, and they've a lot of influence in the decision making that is done in those countries. So that's another way of doing that. And of course, I think even institutions that are in developed countries, they can then partner with the smaller institutions in those countries. Like, for example, I would give an example of Zimbabwe. We depend on agriculture, but if we find institutions that have funding and are willing to provide us facilities and grants to lend to farmers who are doing green-based agriculture, we can do that for easily because we have the access. I can go and speak in their language and convince the farmers that this is the way to do. They know me. They saw me grow up, and actually they look up to me, right? So let's pick those people who have influence in those communities. They will do wonders for us. And of course, let's listen to them. What I have also seen now and then is someone comes from UK or America and they want to prescribe a solution to maybe Bangladesh. That also doesn't work, and people start resisting. So I think that collaboration, that is respect and recognizing that this person is best positioned to provide influence and to provide direction in this particular initiative. Once we recognize that and are able to implement, I think that will really work wonders for us.
And this, I think, gets us to, we got a couple of questions here about as Dabo said, a lot of smaller countries, their emissions are growing enormously. And that's because they've got economic growth. The citizens of those countries are expecting better and better living standards. And how can we in the developed world say to them, no, you mustn't do this. You're not allowed to live like we do. That sounds completely wrong to me. So how can we achieve some sort of equity or fairness between developed and developing nations? Saleem, I think if I could ask you to go in on this one first.
Sure. So I think the biggest opportunity here for all of us, both developed and developing countries, is to share our knowledge with each other in real time as quickly as possible. You know, we used to have these IPCC reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, produce these massive reports every 6-7 years. They're now producing the 6th assessment report, which is, you know, the 6th after about 30 years. We simply don't have time to wait for the 7th assessment report in another 7 years' time to tell us what to do. We're going to have to collaborate, share knowledge in real time. And there are 3 aspects to this which are important in my view. Firstly, the research community, the knowledge community, both practitioner and academic, need to be connected to each other globally. those of us who are in the South, in the developing world, with those of you who are in the North, in the developed world. We need to be collaborating actively in doing joint research that is useful for everybody around the world, not just useful for a few, which is unfortunately how research funding is spent so far. The vast majority is spent on those who have money and not on those who don't have money. That really is unfair. So there's the research side of this. Then at the same time, and this is not sequential, but in parallel, we have to move knowledge into practice. And that requires the practitioners and decision makers, whether they be private sector companies or they be policymakers at national or local level or city mayors, all of them to be dealing with this knowledge input in real time to help them make their decisions on what to do. And my field of research, which is on adaptation, which for the last 20 years I've been working on, is very much that modality or that paradigm. It's a learning by doing paradigm. It's not theory to practice, but practice to theory. And it's about co-generation of knowledge between decision makers and researchers working together and collaborating to produce, co-produce the knowledge that is useful to the decision makers. And that learning by doing, to me, is the paradigm that we have to embrace now. Not doing research, publishing research, and then hoping somebody's going to do something with that research. That old paradigm of research first, action second is no longer fit for purpose. We need to do both simultaneously. And then finally, again, to reiterate, it's a global problem that requires global solidarity and global collaboration at a level we have never been able to do before, but we can do now. And I would say, you know, this webinar is a very good example of those of us from all over the world coming together and sharing our knowledge. You know, in the pre-pandemic days, this would not have been that easy. We'd have to fly into London to meet. We don't have to do that anymore. We can now do this quite easily. So technology is allowing us to do this kind of global collaboration. We must seize that opportunity and do much more with it than we have done so far.
Thank you. Prosper, do you have anything to add on this? How does this chime in with your own experience?
Yeah, for me, I think, the decision on how best we can allow that balance, it's difficult. It's like saying if we have a rights issue, then you say the minor shareholders contribute the most sometimes. That has been the major complaint that developing countries have, right? So what I think is we need to have a commensurate adaptation mechanism where I come with my own dollar in line with what I'm doing in terms of the GDP. The bigger entities also come and show commitment. I think that's what is also lacking at the moment. In various discussions, the developing countries feel that developed countries are not so committed, right? Yet the developing countries are already suffering, right? So if everyone comes to the party and everyone is committed and we show that we are doing everything within our powers to put an effort, it's like in a marriage, both two parties should show commitment. That commitment sometimes has been lacking. So it then leads to difficulties. We have to be seeing the same way America or another country is leading in terms of democracy rights across the globe. Let's see the same in entities or countries also showing that same commitment. That really makes a difference.
And Dabo, do you think that all this has to happen at the governmental level, or can it happen at a sort of smaller individual level as well?
I think they firstly need, well, there's all on all levels, basically. On the governmental level, just reflect on the previous the questions. I think is we can't ask the small countries not develop whatever. Instead, the UK, EU, and then the US, including possibly China, would start thinking how to go to these sort of a negative emission growth as quickly as possible to make room to accommodate those extra rooms for extra emissions that is gonna be emitted for those small countries. Instead, this is from production side. From the consumer perspective, we should help. I mean, we should in the West, our consumption lifestyles is not sustainable, at least not is starting to have the movement, is going to green, but it's not quick enough, because our lifestyles is the example for 1.4 billion Chinese, 1.4 billion Indians, and many other countries. They are looking for they are learning our lifestyles, and they think this is a very nice and modernized, and they want to be that. But unfortunately, our lifestyles is carbon intensive. So we can't have another, like, say, 3 billion population to adapt our lifestyle. It's just gonna be disastrous. It's not gonna work. The way go forward is that we had the mistake of fast fashion. I'm sorry to say that, and through my perspective, fast fashion from the environment perspective is a mistake. And how we can make, but the fashion itself is a good thing, but to make a sustainability as a fashion, and then to go around to the developing countries, I think that's what we should advocate and what we should encourage. And those Indian, Chinese, and then later on the Vietnamese, and then they can learn a more green lifestyle as a fashion, because everyone is going for fashion in the end. Yeah.
I mean, this gets back to the whole point, one of the sort of accounting for carbon emissions things. So one of the questions that's come up is a huge challenge for developing countries is that their economies are based on consumption. We're effectively asking countries and individuals to reduce their consumption and spending.
Yeah.
The thing is that it is all based on consumption, but it's not necessarily consumption in the country that's growing. It is to a certain extent, but it's also consumption in the developed world that is driving emissions in the developing and least developed world. So how do we cope with that, Saleem? I mean, sure. There aren't any
There's
easy
no silver
answers.
bullet. Yes, indeed. There's
Easy
no
answers.
silver bullet.
I mean, carrot, stick, what?
Well, I think, one of the biggest phase changes that is going to be necessary, I can see already happening, which is delinking the consumption benefits of energy from fossil dependence. For the last century and a half, we have equated energy use with fossil dependence. We needed coal, we needed petroleum, and we needed natural gas in order to get the benefits of energy. That link is now being gradually, and I would say even faster every single day, being delinked with renewable energy. We can now derive energy from the sun and from wind and from storage, the 3 legs of renewable energy, and provide it at scale, and that scale is getting bigger by the day, to provide the benefits of the energy that we have been used to. So the energy that we get by putting on the light in our house, it doesn't matter where it comes from. We don't have to have it from coal. If we can get it from solar energy, then we get the benefit of that. And if we can delink the benefits of energy use from the source of that energy, then I think we have made the transition. And the faster we can do that, the better we will be. And that does not require consumption cuts, at least immediately. Consumption cuts in and of themselves are a good thing to do for other reasons. But on the energy side, the big leap is switching as fast as we can from fossil fuel dependence to renewable energy. And that's already happening. And that is something that we need to see happen even faster. And I'm quite hopeful that it will happen. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Prosper, does this make sense to you?
Yeah, I think we can have the same level of enjoyment, progress, whilst we transition to greener commodities and ingredients to our enjoyment. For example, I'll give a silly example of here in Zimbabwe, we want to get Toyota Land Cruisers big time because they are good for our terrain and they are a status symbol, even Mercedes-Benz. If Mercedes-Benz gives us an electric car of equal comfort, equal power, then we'll go green, right? So I think we can have the same benefits that we crave for as individuals using the greener commodities. That's what is the key. And I guess we are the intelligent minds like us as actuaries, engineers. Our goal is to design that thing where we don't feel we are losing, but we are getting a very good product.
So that's part of the if you like, the leapfrogging paradigm, that basically not every country has to make all the mistakes that the UK in particular has made. You can learn from our bad experience and get beyond it. But one of the things, and I think your comment there, Prosper, brought this out, is that doing that depends on the car manufacturer, in this case, thinking that they can turn a profit on this, thinking that it's worth their while. And if we get back to the financial services industry, which is obviously Actuaries' main area of focus, again, it's very much built on the profit motive. And can we turn the profit motive into a force for good, or do we have to find a way of de-emphasizing the profit motive? I think if Saleem, you could come in on this briefly, and then Dabo,
Sure.
that would be helpful.
Sure, thank you very much. So I'll give you a very crude characterization from my perspective of this. You can make profits by doing good things, and you can make profits by doing bad things. Crime is actually very profitable, but it's a bad thing, all right? And there are big criminal organizations who make a lot of money by doing bad things. I would add to that list, fossil fuel companies are making a lot of money by doing bad things. So what we need to do is to close down, and I would even say criminalize, the profit making from doing bad things. And polluting is a bad thing. It should not be allowed. And giving subsidies even for doing good things. And renewable energy is a good thing. Waste management is a good thing. Let profit-making companies come in and clean up the mess and make profits from it. I have nothing against profits. Profits are good things, provided they are made in the cause of doing good rather than in the cause of doing bad. And that's a moral judgment, and in fact, even a legal judgment of countries that have to say what is bad and what we won't allow. We have to step in and do that now. Thank you.
Dabo.
Yeah, just a couple more from the investor perspective. We can see the major investors in the world, including BlackRock and Street States and all HSBC, whatsoever cities, their majority of assets are carbon intensive. Their majority of assets is carbon intensive infrastructures, but from making profits perspective, they are not. It only contributes roughly around 10%, those, but they are stable ones. And they gradually starting to invest on the green energies, like the renewable energy, but they don't see it as a stable profit, as Saleem was commenting. Those things, from financial perspective, they need to be changed a little bit, and then trying to do that. The investors or the financial services sectors, when they do the investment, because they are the key power to drive the whole supply chain, and they need to really adjust their mind. We now to have a climate change mitigation, or like the 2 degrees C, as a compulsory target to achieve, and any of their future behaviors should reflect that, and that would make sure or guarantee their stable income in the future, not the traditional like the oil or coal and gas, etc. Yeah.
Thanks very much. We haven't got much time left, so I'm just going to do a sort of quick fire round, as it were, a question that I want all three of you to answer quite briefly if you can, bearing in mind that things are going to get worse for many years. In terms of hard actions rather than talk, what's a best outcome from COP26 for developing countries? Prosper, what would you like to see COP26 come out of COP26?
In two parts, we should get to COP26. Each country coming and say we have reduced the carbon footprint by at least 1%. Let's not wait for 2026. But the best thing is to go to 2026 with tangible improvements. Because I think the previous COPs, we always come with worsening numbers, right? If between 2021 and 2026, we actually come with better numbers, maybe 5%, another one can come with 2%. And then we say, how do we have that, realize a multiplier effect of multiplying my 1% to 5%, another one 2% to 10%, right? So I think that basis is the key for me, coming with better numbers. Then we say, how do we multiply the improvement?
Thank you. Dabo.
What I really like to see here is the global leader in the climate change that would say we would expect it will be EU, China, and the US. There will be the joint leading the climate change, the COP26. So they from this time we not only focus on the current emission giants, but let's also look at the future ones, which in the past, Kyoto on the Paris, they always focus on the current and always not helping or at least not emphasize enough for the future ones. I'm not saying that we should limit their emission growth, but with just acknowledge the developing country will need extra space to grow, the further development, and the global leaders they will act and to make a negative emission growth as quick as possible to make extra rooms. I think that's what I really want to see.
And Saleem?
Thank you. So I'm going to confine myself to this very narrow discussion we've been having on loss and damage. The vulnerable developing countries have actually asked for a agenda item on loss and damage, which, strangely enough, it's not an agenda item in every COP. It only comes up every now and again, every few years. So we've asked for it to be a regular annual agenda item. And in that agenda item, I see a very strong role for the actuarial community, and answering one of the questions on whether there is a role for them in the COPs. There isn't at the moment, but let's make one. Let's from COP26 make a role for the actuarial community to come in, provide their expertise and their knowledge, because as I said, this is just the beginning of this problem. This is not the end of the problem by any means. The problem of loss and damage is going to start in COP26, not end in COP26. Thank you.
Thank you, Saleem. There are going to be actuaries, certainly as observers at COP26, we hope. I think the International Actuarial Association has got observer status, and we're sort of on the waiting list or short list or whatever of the IFoA, so we're hoping for that. But it's now time to draw today's event to a close. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. Thank you very much to Saleem, Dabo and Prosper for their great contributions. Thanks to the audience for your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to them quite all. Please do complete the feedback survey, which will help us improve our sessions later on. Our next event in the series is on Wednesday, the 6th of October, when I'll be joined by Steve Waygood, Chief Responsible Investment Officer at Aviva Investors, Catherine Howarth, Chief Executive of Share Action, which looks at impact investing, and Mike Clark, an actuary of Ario Advisory, and we'll be discussing what will COP26 mean for investment. You can register for this event and others in the series on the IFoA events page. So that's the end of today's event. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and thank you very much to our panelists who've done a great job. So thanks, and hope to see you next month. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.